We've just got our first blockbuster trade of the new NBA season, and we're only in September. Now, I'd be lying to you if I'd said that I'd seen this move coming, but when I start to think about it just a little more and more, it makes so much sense. You see, the Minnesota Timberwolves are sending four-time All-Star and two-time All-NBA big man Karl Anthony-Towns to the New York Knicks. Yes, somehow, some way, that super team out in the Bronx just found a move to get them that much better. Now, the Knicks have a pretty loaded roster. You could look at them and say that there are nearly no flaws on the team already. However, if you were to point out a weakness that the Knicks did have, it was the big man position where they were lacking a little. I mean, Mitchell Robinson is currently their center, but he's been dealing with a lot of injuries. And so you bring in a guy like Karl Anthony-Towns to fill in that hole, and all of a sudden, the New York Knicks are the favorite in the Eastern Conference. Now, who are the Knicks losing in this trade? Because they got to be giving up something if they're getting Karl Anthony-Towns in return. Well, first off, the New York Knicks are sending Julius Randle to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who is an unbelievable all-star in his own right. However, he had also been dealing with a ton of injuries, and the New York Knicks were having a lot of success with him out of the lineup. So it was really in the air about how the Knicks would look with Julius Randle returning to the roster, because when Randle left, he was an important part of the New York Knicks game. However, they managed to adapt and get even better without him there. So you had that controversy brewing in New York, but now that he's out the door, they don't really have to worry about how Randle's going to fit with the Knicks. And then, of course, the Knicks are also sending out Donte DiVincenzo. Yes, we didn't even get a single game with the Nova Knicks before one of them left the team, and in this case, it's DiVincenzo, who's going to add a much-needed scoring presence to this Minnesota Timberwolves team. You know, the Timberwolves were known for their defense last postseason. However, they did lack when it came to three-pointers and a bit of scoring at times, and that's exactly the kind of production that Donte DiVincenzo is going to provide now that he's on the Timberwolves. And the Timberwolves also receive a future first-round pick via the Detroit Pistons. Who knows what protections are on those picks quite yet. However, if it's a first rounder coming from the Detroit Pistons, it's going to be good in the future. You can trust me on that. And the Charlotte Hornets are also involved in this trade just a little bit, but they get a whole lot of nothing and give a whole lot of nothing. They were really just there so the money could work, so you could just kind of ignore that part of the trade. But anyway, like I said, the Minnesota Timberwolves will be receiving Donte DiVincenzo, Julius Randle, and a future first-round pick for their former first overall pick in Karl Anthony-Towns. They selected him with the first overall pick back in 2015 and then spent nearly more than half a decade trying to build a good roster around him and failed for the most part at the beginning of his career with the Timberwolves. However, the team was starting to look better, but that was under the guidance of Anthony Edwards, right? He's their new superstar, and with the new CBA, thanks to CJ McCollum, there just wasn't enough room for the Timberwolves to keep Karl Anthony-Towns, Rudy Gobert, and Anthony Edwards for much longer. And this is where we get into the why of the trade. Because on the surface, it doesn't make a lot of sense that the Timberwolves are trading their second best player after just making the conference finals for the first time in 20 years and the second time in franchise history. You know, why trade Karl Anthony-Towns now? Well, I'll tell you in a second, but for right now, I just wanted to remind you guys to slow down, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Every subscription is greatly appreciated and goes a long way. All right, now let's get back into the video. You see, the thing about the Minnesota Timberwolves and their decision all comes down to the new CBA agreement, like I mentioned earlier. Because here's the thing. The Minnesota Timberwolves were set to pay their three superstars over $40 million each this season alone. And it would have added up to somewhere around $130 million for just those three players. And the new NBA salary cap, while it has been rising year by year, is only at $140 million this season, which would have meant that they would have only had $10 million to spare before they go over the salary cap and eventually reach the luxury tax, which sits at about $170 million, and then the first and second apron, with the second apron being $188 million. And as you can imagine, the Minnesota Timberwolves would have far exceeded that with all three of those players still on the roster. And with the way that this ownership group works, they don't like to exceed even the luxury tax, so they aren't going to be keeping all three of those players for long, which is why Karl Anthony-Towns had to go. And the thing with Karl Anthony-Towns having to go is because there are new restrictions in this CBA when it comes to violating these first and second level aprons. Now, these new restrictions go as follow. Teams cannot include cash in a trade. First round picks 7 years out in the future are frozen, which means they also wouldn't be able to be traded. Teams cannot use a trade exception generated by aggregating the salaries of multiple players. Teams cannot use a trade exception generated in a prior year. A team's first round pick is moved to the end of the first round if they remain in the second apron for 3 out of 5 seasons. So these are all things that the Timberwolves would have had to be dealing with had they decided to keep the big three that they have currently. And of course, they didn't want to have to deal with all of these new restrictions, because if they did, it would make trading basically impossible going forward until one of the big three were gone, and that's exactly what happened here. They move out Karl Anthony-Towns, because they traded a lot for Rudy Gobert, and I'm sure Karl Anthony-Towns has a lot more value on him now, so it's better to trade Cat than it is to trade Gobert. You would never get those 5 first-round picks you gave up for him back, so there's that, right? Karl Anthony-Towns was the one that needed to go. And of course, in return, you get Julius Randle, who is making slightly less money, but he is only due, I want to say, $28 million this season, and then next season he has $30 million on the books, but that is a player option. And with the way that Julius Randle's career is going, he might just pick up that player option, because who knows if he gets paid this much amount of money ever again. And then of course, Donte DiVincenzo is, set for a 3-year salary worth about $12 million annually. So you've got that along with Julius Randle, and it's just kind of cheaper long term than what Karl Anthony-Towns would have been, because he's nearing that $50 million mark already. So, that's why this trade happened. And the best thing about this move for both teams is that it keeps the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves contenders, right? Because you're not looking at the New York Knicks and thinking they've fallen off. In fact, now when you look at the Knicks roster, you start to get some fear in your eyes, because you've got to go up against Jalen Brunson, who is an absolute stud, one of the best point guards in the game right now, probably a top 10 player, if we're being honest. And then good, solid, efficient starters like a Josh Hart, OG Anunoby. They're gonna be there. They're gonna be great for the roster. And then, of course, Mikal Bridges, who is coming over from the Brooklyn Nets, also a new acquisition. Those guys paired alongside Karl Anthony-Towns, all of a sudden this Knicks team is scary. And I didn't even cover all of the great pieces that the Knicks have. And then when you go over to Minnesota, it's not like they're falling off a cliff by any means. I mean, Julius Randle will fill the hole that Cat is leaving behind, and Donte DiVincenzo is a perfect piece for this Timberwolves roster. Who knows if he is a team chemistry merchant? We'll find out this season. Shooters do get streaky, so we'll see if he's hot or absolutely cold. But anyway, that's about it for this video. I really just wanted to recap the trade because I felt like it was so, out of nowhere at first, right? It just kind of blew my mind, the fact that this happened in late September when there was no NBA news. I had to talk about it, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. All right, like I said, catch y'all later. Much love. Deuces.